Okay, I'm gonna have to work with yours. Nice to meet you. So how is Mr. Steiner doing? I haven't talked to him in a long time. Yeah. Yeah. He's an unusual human. The day is not. There you go. No, I guess. Yeah, right. George Ingram.
Yeah, this size.
I try very hard.
It's summer.
So, I mean, it's interesting that she comes to
Welcome. Welcome to the launch of the 2024 Aid Transparency Index. The Brookings Center for Sustainable Development is pleased to be hosting this with Publish What You Fund. I am George Ingram, Senior Fellow at the Center and Chair of Friends of Publish What You Fund. Why is the Center hosting this event? Effectiveness is the essence of development assistance. Data and other information on assistance help stakeholders understand where aid is provided, for what purpose, how it is delivered, and what results it achieves, and thereby know how to advance the effectiveness of assistance. Data on development assistance is critical for partner governments to know what donors are doing in their countries in order to inform policy and budget decisions. For local organizations in government to know what is happening in their communities and how better to serve their citizens. For donors to know what other donors, public and private, are doing in order to avoid duplication and to understand where and with whom to collaborate. For civil society organizations to know whether aid is meeting their needs, to identify gaps, to know with whom they might collaborate. And for monitoring and evaluation so all stakeholders can understand and assess the impact of assistance. The effort to advance aid transparency has evolved over a dozen years from a focus principally on just collecting and making the data public to ensuring that the data is useful and is used. Today, for example, we will discuss how various data sets can be joined with near-time IATI data for informed and improved decision-making, such as deciding what and where to provide humanitarian assistance and assessing progress towards and where to concentrate on the SDGs. Our agenda today involves two presentations. First by Gary Forster on the findings of the 2024 index, and then by Laurel Patterson, who will explain how the UNDP uses IATI data to track and assess progress on the SDGs by making sense of large data sets. The presentations will be followed by a panel. Gary Forster, for the past 6 years, CEO of Publish What You Fund, came to that position with a background working in the private sector, and extensive work on health in Africa, and running an African-focused NGO. Laurel Patterson, Director of the SDG integration at the UNDP, has had a career devoted to development, first in academia and subsequently in various roles with the UN, UN Women, and UNDP, including in Africa and headquarters. Gary, the podium is yours.
Okay, good morning. I'm really excited to be here to speak to you today, not just to share the results of the 2024 Aid Transparency Index, but also to discuss how the aid transparency movement is helping to deliver on many of its initial goals of accountability and development effectiveness. The headline this year is that the 2024 Aid Transparency Index has recorded its highest ever scores, marking a continued improvement in aid transparency amongst the world's major aid and development agencies. The index found advancements in the quality, quantity, and timeliness of aid data. The average score across all 50 organizations in the 2024 index was the highest seen, and more organizations achieved scores in the top very good category, and fewer organizations than ever before were in the bottom very poor category. The Aid Transparency Index is the only independent measure of aid transparency among the world's major aid donors. It is the result of a 6-month process which includes checking donor data against 35 indicators, including financial, project design, location, and results information. In the end, we reviewed data on approximately 166,000 projects, totaling hundreds of billions of dollars in financial commitments. And while we cannot review every IATI publisher, the index captures 92% of all the data published in IATI over the past 12 months. A deliberate approach of ours is engagement with all publishers in the index to provide feedback and improve performance between the initial assessment and the final assessment. And this approach pays dividends. Between the two assessments, the average score increased by 6 points. So let's look at the results for specific agencies. At the top of the rankings, the African Development Bank's sovereign portfolio ranked first with a score of 98.8 out of 100. The Inter-American Development Bank ranked second, and the highest ranking bilateral aid agency, the US Millennium Challenge Corporation, came third. Congratulations to all of you. All but one of the assessed organizations are publishing at least some data in the International Aid Transparency Initiative reporting standard, meaning it is open, standardized, comparable, and importantly, machine readable. Some organisations made significant improvements compared with 2022. Among the biggest jumps in score were the UK's FCDO and the EC's Directorate General for International Partnerships. Lower down in the rankings, the United Arab Emirates Ministry increased its score by 43 points after it started publishing detailed IATI data for the first time, and Japan's score jumped more than 30 points as it restarted its publication following a hiatus in 2022. 6 UN organisations are assessed in the 2024 index and all performed well. These organisations spend large volumes of international aid and have a leading role in their respective areas of aid and development. The 2 newly assessed organisations, WFP and UNHCR, scored 85 and 63 points respectively, which is an impressive achievement for their first assessments in the index. The Aid Transparency Index assesses 6 public sector portfolios and 6 private sector portfolios of the major international and regional development banks. Those banks with public portfolios are among the top performers, occupying 3 of the top 5 positions. So one thing we never talk about enough is just how detailed the Aid Transparency Index website is. If you click on the individual bars on the chart on the website, for example, here I've clicked on EC INDPA, you'll find very detailed analysis for each of the 50 agencies explaining precisely what information they provide and precisely what they need to do to improve their transparency. So despite our good headline news, we're the first to acknowledge that not all is rosy. Some organisations have a long way to go to be truly transparent, and across the board, the priority area for improvement is performance information, such as results and evaluations. We still don't know enough about impact. There is still room for improvement by all publishers, which is why we will revisit the index methodology to ensure we continue to drive ever higher standards of transparency. So now that there is all this data, how do we make sense of it? What can project-level data do to help us address global needs? Well, for one, it allows all stakeholders to assess global promises and to challenge donor claims on everything from localization to climate finance to gender investments. When Oxfam wants to check World Bank claims on climate spending, they go and look at the individual projects and make their own assessment. When we at Publish What You Fund were concerned about USAID's new localization measurement approach, we went to the raw data and looked for ourselves. When agencies laud their gender or women's economic empowerment efforts, you can go to the individual projects and determine for yourselves whether those claims are legitimate. But it is more than just accountability. This data allows for more informed decision-making, allows for better planning, coordination, and hopefully better results amongst donors and implementers. Transparency cannot solve everything, but it provides the foundation for better development assistance. So having the data is the first step, and accessing it is just as important. There are many ways to access project-level IATI data. There are individual dashboards that run on IATI data, such as USAID's foreignassistance.gov, the FCDO's Dev Tracker, or the EU Aid Explorer. But there are also dashboards such as dPortal and tools such as the Country Development Finance Data Tool, which help you get to the raw data. So we maintain a tracker of data use cases on our website, and some of the examples from just the last year are really impressive. The Institute for Journalism and Social Change used IATI data to identify aid-funded health and education facilities damaged or destroyed in Gaza. Development initiatives used IATI data to train a natural language processing model to identify climate-related projects funded by the FCDO since 2009. And we'll hear another example later when our colleague from the World Bank tells us more about the Global Alliance for Food Security's dashboard. So for anyone who's not familiar with the data I'm referring to, I appreciate this probably all sounds a bit abstract, so let me give you a practical example. Let's use dPortal to access the data. Let's use the African Development Bank's information to illustrate why, in part, they are top of the index with their sovereign portfolio. And given the importance of WASH to development, I've picked an example that points to how effective AFDB's water and sanitation investments are. So this is the front page of D-Portal. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. Maybe some of you aren't. You can see I'm filtering the data. I've chosen Zambia as the recipient country. I've chosen the African Development Bank as the reporting organization. I've chosen water and sanitation as a sector group, and I want to look at live projects. So I've selected an activity status of under implementation. This provides 4 activities. And on the screen here, you can see the top 3, along with a heat map showing where these activities are taking place in Zambia. Now, I've selected the 3rd activity. It's called the Transforming Rural Livelihoods in Western Zambia project, which is an AFDB-funded project with a value of $20 million. When you look at the investment, you get all sorts of information. You get start and end dates, you get details of the various actors, showing that Zambia's Ministry of Local Government and Housing is the main implementer. You also get detailed descriptions of the project, along with information about the target groups and objectives. And sorry if some of these slides are hard to see. Hopefully this is giving you a sense of what's available and will encourage you to go and look for more information yourselves. You can also see how funding disbursements are tracking against the project budget and what, if any, loan or interest payments are being made. So there's a huge wealth of data here. This project also has more than 20 quantitative objectives. With targets and data for actual performance, I've selected one of these. This one is the access to improved drinking water supply objective here. So what's also unique about the IATI reporting standard is the ability to link documents to activities. The AFDB has attached lots. So here you can see contracts that relate to this project, you can see pre-project appraisals, and you can see evaluation documents. So let's look at one of these evaluations. Again, this is difficult to see, but bear with me. This is a December 2023 evaluation, and I think it's pretty honest and insightful about the project. Firstly, a blunt assessment of progress, and I quote from the evaluation. Overall implementation progress has not improved as planned due to poor performing contractors, both for construction of sanitation facilities and those for manual drilling of boreholes. However, the major works on development of new boreholes are now complete, along with the construction of 442 out of 763 sanitation facilities. Access to improved sanitation has increased from 7.4% to 36%, towards a target of 50%. More than 500,000 people have access to improved water supply, and more than 300,000 people have access to improved sanitation. Now, the value of this information is immediately evident, not just to trace funds and hold AFDB and the Zambian government accountable, but also for learning and coordination. I did a quick search under water and sanitation in Zambia and found 67 active projects at this moment in time, and how many of these would benefit from understanding the challenges that this project has faced. More to the point, I found 408 closed activities. Are you telling me none of these had issues finding contractors to dig boreholes over the last few years? So remember, this is just an example of one project that I'm showing you here. There are more than 800,000 projects in the IATI dataset. They're updated on a daily basis. So in summary, the 2024 Aid Transparency Index shows how data is more accessible and useful than ever, and demonstrates just why the Aid Transparency Index is important to keep data up to date and push for improvements. Before I go, some quick thank yous. Firstly, I'd like to thank the agencies who feature in the index for their engagement before, during, and after the process. I also want to thank everyone in the IATI community, including the IATI Secretariat, but also the IATI members and technical experts who are all part of this push for more and better data. I want to say thank you to George, to Junji, and the Brookings team for hosting us today, to the Publish What You Fund team, including Alex Tilley and Elmer Jenkins, who lead the research. A special thank you to Sam Cavanagh, who leads our communications and carries a huge amount of the burden for the launch. Sam, we appreciate you more than you know. I also need to thank Sally, Henry, Ben, Afram, who help us crunch the data, liaise with publishers, and deliver the website. So we couldn't do this as well without the support of 29 independent reviewers who give up their time voluntarily and help us scrutinise the process and the scoring. Their input is invaluable for ensuring a rigorous and fair process. And finally, while the Aid Transparency Index is an entirely independent project managed by Publish What You Fund, it is kindly funded by IATI and its members, and for that support we are grateful. I will now hand over to Laurel Patterson, SDG Integration Director at UNDP. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. This is the real test. 3 or 4 years ago, it would be finding the mute button on Zoom. Here we are. Good morning, good afternoon. So I'm going to follow in the same spirit as Gary. I want to give you a sense of possibility and progress on the SDGs. I will not shy away from where the challenges are. I want to make the case to you of how important development cooperation is to achieving the SDGs and how important the work that Gary is leading, Publish What You Fund, and the support that we provide. UNDP is very proud to host the Secretariat of the IATI initiative. And of course, that's an initiative that's successful based on its members. And I think it's growing really in power over the past couple of years. So what I'd like to tell you today first is a little bit about the way we've been approaching the SDGs. And for all that we hear, 17% are on track, and how will we meet this agenda, how will we move it forward, et cetera. We have found there is a lot of interest, there is a lot of momentum. And when you get out of these aggregates and into country-specific, region-specific, locally specific action, it tells a different story of progress, what's possible, and the commitment that many people have to achieving the SDGs. Why? Because the SDGs fundamentally is the world's first systems agenda. It's the only agenda that we have that's universal, it's indivisible, and to me the magic of this agenda is that it's focused on the interlinkages. So when we worked with 100 countries last year, moving towards the 2023 SDG Summit, we tried to look both at creating an opportunity space, really leaning into available data, not getting stuck when we didn't have it, because most times we don't, leaning into where national priorities are moving already, and then really trying to map this practically. Hold the complexity of development challenges, but act with precision. This is what we were after. One of the headlines coming out of that work, and that was last year but remains just as relevant today, is that this development that we want, that's just, that's green, right, that's digitally enabled, is being constrained by the growth that we get. And that growth, when we look at growth trajectories across the 100 countries that we had partnered with, is not moving in the right direction. We find that poverty levels are stagnating or reversing. These are statistics that you know carbon emissions are moving in the wrong direction. But many countries don't feel that they have a lot of options to be able to move forward without investing in growth so that they can finance what they need to be able to invest in these, generally speaking, quite expensive transitions. And so progress you see in front of you. I want to draw your attention also then to some of the excellent work which has also taken place over the past couple of years to really define and understand the science of the interlinkages between the SDGs. And again, as this work continues to unfold, you're seeing a visual from the Global Sustainable Development Report. That's an independent report of scientists that's produced every 4 years. It increasingly gives us evidence and a direction of where to invest, where can policy choices have outsized impact, how do we capitalize on the multipliers. And together with that, to this perspective on a universal agenda, but also a universal need to lean in, I'm sharing also a visualization from our Human Development Report, which shows that there is no country, when you look at Human Development Index, which UNDP leads, and you adjust it for planetary considerations, there is no country in the world that's achieving a high level of human development that is not at the cost of the planet. This is our global challenge. This is our universal challenge together. And again, development cooperation is not the only part of that answer, but it is a really important catalyst for change. So let me tell you a little bit about what we found, and I'm going to connect it directly with the IATI data and what that might tell us, and hopefully moving into the panels next about how we can encourage and advance transparency for SDG achievement. So the first thing that we did in our work is we look at SDG trends. And to do this, we rely on the data that governments provide to the United Nations through their National Statistics Office, part of the 2030 means of implementation. What we have not shied away from is the gray bars. What are the gray bars? That's where we don't have data. And we know that for 34 of the 169 targets, we don't have methods that are internationally recognized to measure progress right now. So we asked those countries, let's take a look at this together. All of this is sort of grouped by the 5 Ps of the 2030 agenda, but it's all detailed at the target level. Does it look accurate? Are we missing anything? Countries have a lot of data that they don't report through UN statistics. What could we add? How could we make this more accurate? And we build that into a data platform that we run at UNDP. And that's good, but we all know the phrase analysis paralysis. So we know that even with the best data, we can make bad decisions and we can make good decisions where we don't have all of the data either. So we build a machine read capability, and any of you can do this today with any of the documents that you may be working with in the development space, to immediately provide a resonance of which SDGs are the most prominent based on a national policy, regional, or local policy or development vision. And the bigger the bubble, the more resonant that particular SDG goal in terms of what we were seeing reflected in the policy documents. This is not a judgment, but it is an opportunity for us to sit with partners in any country in the world and say, is that what we expected? Does it look like these investment choices are going to reach those last mile challenges? Would I do it differently? Is there something else I'm missing? And one of the things I'll come to at the end is you certainly don't see much in the way of Goal 13 and planetary goals because they didn't come up so often in national development visions. What could we do to change that if it's a key requirement and a need in different countries? And again, it's good to have this information. It's good to be able to do it quickly, right? You bring it to a discussion. What does it look like when you then take the best science that exists on SDG interlinkages and you map it? And the way that we do that is the best science, a global framework on interlinkages, but then we color code it based on the SDGs for progress for a particular country so that we can be as precise as possible, drown out the noise as best as possible. Where could we act that could have outsized impact today in my context? And getting to this last part is sometimes disappointing for people. Sometimes it's reassuring for others. There's no algorithm to get us to those decisions because it takes so many different considerations, people, and factors in a room to be able to really design and determine what those choices should be with precision. So for us, the science of dialogue, often missing today, the science of new forms of collaboration and partnership, this is key or it doesn't move forward in the way that we need it to with the speed that's required today. These are a couple examples of what came through the global analysis. Of course, every country is going to be a little bit different. But what's important here, and it won't surprise you, is that countries said to us over and over again, decent work is important. And that wouldn't be a shock to anybody in the room. But when we spend more time together, we said, but what would make that truly an SDG proposition? What would be different about the way that you're creating decent work so that it achieves these other effects that you're after? And most countries said, I'll know then that my jobs are truly an SDG proposition, job creation, when I see numbers move in 4.4, youth empowerment. When I see numbers move in 5.5, women's economic empowerment. When I start to see shifts in social fabric, so it's more inclusive, we have the metrics for that in 10.2. And again, it wouldn't surprise you, but just opening up that conversation space means engaging with people that we might not differently and relying on others for our success because we're jointly knit together in this endeavor. And on the other side of the screen, you see the IATI data. And this is based on where publishers have been tagging their progress and their activities and their funds to different SDGs. So this then allows us to say, okay, if we were to build that coalition and really see an opportunity space to advance decent work as a driver of sustainable development, where's the money moving now? At least from a development cooperation perspective. Could we do better? What does it look like by theme? What would it look like in a country level? Gary gave us some examples of this. Who are the top 5 or 10 donors? Should we call them up? How do we get into a room together where we can start to build these coalitions, again with precision on the issues that matter the most? Effective institutions, also goal 16 at the high-level political forum is under review. And you might say, yes, we know that. Governance is key. We said, what would make governance a driver of sustainable development across the board? And for the lowest income countries in the 100 that we were working with, they said, I will know that institutions are serving their goals and objectives when I have fair economic foundations, 8.1. Now I have to make a different coalition, a different set of calls. And others said, as you would also expect, I'll know because public service delivery will be more effective. I'll see it in health, 3.8. I'll see it in access to education, 4.1. And again, this gives us the precision when we combine it with the data from IATI to say, but where are funding flows moving now? How else might we? How else could we? How could we crowd in different sources of investment from private sector or other? Where are the banks moving now? And we'll hear from Zachary a little bit later. I won't spend too much time on the other two, but resilient infrastructure came up over and over again as a driver, not only for the sake of infrastructure, but driving innovation. For shock-resilient social protection systems and certainly in cities. And lastly, in cities as well, too. So what was important for us, and I think what's important for all of us together as we move forward on SDG progress, is not only to seize hold of an opportunity space, but to understand what's holding us back and be clear-eyed about that. And so here again, you see the numbers when we look at GDP growth trajectories. Again, this is based on IMF data. But then when you start to look into how inclusive and how carbon intensive that growth is, it asks questions about the way that we're moving forward and the way that we'll need to change some of these systems and choices if we want to achieve the SDGs. It's not that we can have them both. It's that some things will need to transform. But again, our intention is to be as precise as possible so that we can act with coalitions and with urgency. And of course, the challenges that many countries are facing in terms of debt distress and other financing challenges makes it really difficult unless we make reform at different levels, not only national level progress, but in global systems. We will not be able to unlock the progress that we need to see. You'll be familiar with these numbers, but of course the reality is that development cooperation is itself in crisis. And the president of the ECOSOC, the ambassador from Chile, has said over the course of the past few weeks, this is the crisis. Development is in crisis. And we need to think of ways to really come together differently to be able to tackle with the urgency that we need. Even within the aid portfolio, of course, numbers are changing quickly. And we have seen increases in aid, but those were attributed to the war in Ukraine, certainly to what we have seen in pandemic recovery and also in-country refugee costs, which have risen dramatically since 10 years ago. We're also seeing opportunities in innovation in the financing space, and this is just one of them. Of course, we could talk about SDG bonds and many other ways that countries are creating and carving out an opportunity space. UNDP does a lot of work in this area, but this is just to see the way that public and private flows are coming together to make investments in the areas that are really key for the large transitions that we need to see. And as we think going ahead with the IATI initiative, and certainly the way that it's building, reinforcing, and also informing our data foundations on the SDGs, we're going to look to focus on some of the most driving issues that we're seeing across the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agenda. One of the things that we've noted here, it certainly came up at our Members' Assembly earlier this year, is on climate finance. Why? Because we didn't see it come up last year, and we know it's key. And the reality is that a lot of the financing and conversations in the space of climate agenda is different from those in an SDG agenda, and we don't have time, resources, or the political will to split these things up. So we bring it right together, and that will be a very big focus for us and the IATI team this year. I'll leave it here. Everything that we do is online, digitally enabled, open code, open source. It's for you, so I do encourage you to explore, and thank you for your time.
Well, Garrett, thank you for kicking us off today and laying the groundwork for a panel discussion. And you've really laid the basis and demonstrated how IATI data can be used by itself and with other data to track the SDGs and to make other decisions important to development. I will start the introduction of the panel with the panelist who is furthest away. Samuel, good morning, and thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Samuel Kobina Anima is head of statistical service of Ghana, a particularly relevant position for today's discussion. And he's also professor of economics at the University of Cape Coast, and his academic career has included teaching professors positions in several universities in the UK. Zachary Carmichael, who is supposedly sitting next to Samuel, is senior economist at the World Bank at the Agriculture and Food Global Practice. Among other roles, he is the technical coordinator for food security crisis for the IDA crisis response window. In his 20-plus year career at the World Bank, he has served in other roles, all dealing with various aspects of conflict, crisis, and fragility. Next to me is Christophe Toko. He's senior deputy in the USAID Bureau of Planning, Learning, and Resource Management, where he oversees the Office of Policy Implementation and Analytics and the Program Office. In his more than 25 years of service at AID, he has managed programs in Africa and the Middle East and held policy positions in Washington and at the USAID representative in Paris. For those of you in the virtual world, you can submit questions via @2024index or events@brookings.edu, and they will be monitored online. To make the discussion a little more interactive, if someone in the room has a burning question that can be posed in one sentence while they're having our dialogue, raise your hand and a microphone will be delivered to you. So, to kick off, Samuel, as Chief Statistician for Ghana, tell us about your role. What data do you use and what are you trying to track in Ghana?
Thank you very much, George, and good morning, good afternoon, depending on where we are participating from with this event. So as you rightly said, I'm the head for the National Statistical Office, and per the mandate of the service, we need to advise the government and the general public on all matters related to social, economic, environment, demography, business, financial, and basically things that affect living conditions. So that is the role of the Ghana Statistical Service. Data that we use for our work traditionally, as we all know, is data that we source from surveys and censuses, but in recent times, we've sort of gotten into using non-traditional data sources and data from other jurisdictions, i.e. administrative data, data from big data, geospatial data, and data such as what we are launching today, that is the IATI data. So we're using data from diverse perspectives to ensure that we advise government and the general public on the state of living conditions.
Great. Thank you, Samuel. Zachary, your role in the agriculture and global food practice, tell us a little bit about it. What are the goals of the office? And give us a description of the Global Alliance for Food Security's dashboard and what it's trying to, what purpose it's serving.
Well, thank you, George, and it's a pleasure to be invited to this esteemed panel on such an important topic. And just before I begin, a very special thanks to you, Gary, and the rest of the planning team. I know how much effort goes into organizing these events. Before I share a little bit about what I do at the World Bank, and I'm supported by a pretty large team there, I'd like to share a couple of figures with you, which is a very stereotypical thing that World Bankers do, so please permit me. As everyone may know, the world population is roughly around 8 billion people. Of these 8 billion people, there are about 2.4 billion that we consider food insecure. That basically means that they do not have the resources to live a normal, healthy life. And if we go a bit further, we find within that group a segment of people who are experiencing what we call crisis conditions of food insecurity. These conditions are very serious. They threaten the very lives and livelihoods of the people affected. And today we have about 282 million people in these extreme conditions. The previous executive director for the World Food Program is famous for saying, these are the people that are knocking on famine's door. What's concerning is that we've been seeing the number of people in these crisis conditions grow pretty significantly over the last few years. Today, levels are around 2.5 times what they were in 2016. And we're seeing basically a great reversal. We're going back in time on this. And as Laurel mentioned, we have these goals, these sustainable development goals. One of those goals is to end hunger by 2030. And we are actually going to miss that goal by a mile unless we do something completely different and do it now. My role at the World Bank is to really understand what's driving these conditions and to work with our country counterparts, governments, also our United Nations partners, our close bilateral partners to figure out how do we actually reverse that trend. And unfortunately, COVID-19, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and also the recent conflict in Gaza has really exacerbated those conditions across the globe. From the recent crisis that we've seen, We had the leadership of the prior G7 presidency of Germany, who really took this issue on head on. And they established what was called the Global Alliance for Food Security. It's really an alliance of over 40 plus institutions across the globe to try and consider how do we do these things differently? How do we make sure that we are not at the call of all of these crisis responding late and on an ad hoc basis? And part of that engagement actually materialized in something called the Global Food and Nutrition Security Dashboard. And it's a very simple principle. It's a way in which we consolidate the vast array of information on food and nutrition security across the ecosystem in one place. And it relates to both data, analytical side, so what's the state of early warnings? It relates to financing, architecture across the globe, and it also relates to our programming. How do we bring all of that treasure trove of information into one spot?
I used your dashboard in a blog I posted yesterday as one example of how you can use the IATI data. How do people what's the quickest, easiest way to access the dashboard?
GAFS.info.
Repeat that.
GAFS.info, GAFS.info. It's a publicly available website. You can manipulate the data there, you can download the data, and it's constantly growing. But we have these dashboards that we developed as institutions, right? We do it all the time. We reinvent the wheel. I would say the distinction here is this one really stuck to the wall, and this is where we're putting a ton of effort, investment in.
Good. Christoph, your position in the policy, planning, learning bureau, resource, you've got so many names of that bureau, I never get them all right, includes oversight on how data is used. How does AID use data and evidence to inform decision-making and funding? And what have you seen the changes in its use in the last few years?
Sure, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. And first of all, just wanted to say that while I'm also with USAID, I'm also representing the USG here because USAID is the reporter for over 20 US federal agencies on their foreign assistance, which you can find at foreignassistance.gov. It's our website. Also, as background, just to say that we also have strong support from our Congress in using evidence and data. We have the Evidence Act of 2018 and the Foreign Assistance Transparency and Accountability Act of 2016, which shows that there's a strong bipartisan support for transparency, accountability, and the use of data. And that's what we're striving to do. And while our results in the Publish What You Fund are good, we're always trying to be better, and some of our agencies were great, like MCC, and others all have work to do to improve. So on the USAID side, we have definitely been on the cutting edge in the sense that we launched an evidence policy in 2012, well before there was ever any requirement from the Evidence Act. And in that policy, at the time, I was a program officer in the field, and it provided a space for us to set aside money to do evaluations. It set aside a space for us to think about impact evaluations and make a use of them to make better decisions. And for me, that was a really great thing as a program officer because there wasn't necessarily that permission before then to actually do that. So to me, using evidence is a culture shift, and it takes time, and we're on a journey where we're trying to use more and more evidence. And I think with tightening aid budgets across the planet, there's an even bigger desire to look at how do we use data to make more informed decisions and have more impact with what we do. So in the more recent years since I've been back in Washington, we've done a number of things. First of all, I'd cite that our Deputy Administrator Coleman is a champion for evidence use in our agency and has pushed us very strongly to look at how we do that. One way that we have concretely made a shift is in it's very, I guess, esoteric, but our own internal guidebook on how we do activity planning was a requirement to look at cost-effectiveness data. And so we all know that there's more and more data about what interventions are cost-effective, more cost-effective than others in different sectors. And now that is part of our analyses when we're doing a new project. We're looking at, is there data on cost effectiveness, and what can that tell us about the design for this project? I'd also say that in our country development cooperation strategies, basically our country strategies planning process, we look at data to inform that strategy. And then also at mid-course stock takings of our strategies, we're also looking at data, and often our analytics team within PLR is providing the country with a lot of third-party data on where the country sits and how we can use that. I'd also say that we have a new knowledge management policy, which is very exciting. I think we feel like we're cutting edge in that sense. It was just launched a month or so ago. And in that, it looks at both how we manage knowledge, both internally and operationally, but also how we should manage knowledge with local partners and different knowledge networks, and make sure that all that knowledge is informing our decision making. And then finally, I'd just say that with the advent of artificial intelligence, I think we all probably in the room recognize that we're at the cusp of a huge sea change in how we do our work, and we're all grappling with what that means for the future. But it's super exciting to me because AI is going to allow us to really look at all the data that's being generated and make even better and more informed decisions. And I don't know how that's going to play out, but I'm excited to see how it looks in the future.
Good, thank you. Samuel, tell us a little bit more about how you are tracking Ghana's progress on the SDGs. What data do you use? How do international actors fit into the picture? And what data do you not have that would be useful? And finally, is the information available on IATI, which I understand you have not yet started to use? Would that be a valuable tool in assessing Ghana's progress?
Thank you, George, once again. So Ghana, like all other countries, is participating in the voluntary national reporting, and we have a national reporting platform for the Sustainable Development Goals, where we currently say that we are reporting on about 51% of the SDGs, specifically about 127 out of the SDG indicators. The data that we use for reporting on the SDGs, George, as I indicated, comes from various sources. We rely either on our surveys and censuses, and also based on our workings with government ministries, departments, and agencies. We use administrative data to do that. A couple of the SDG indicators we've deployed citizens-generated data that to give us a sense of what data we can rapidly get at the subnational level to report on some of the SDGs. We do indeed rely on some other international agencies for the reporting of the SDGs. I see a different perspective to the data on IATI, since it's giving us not just reporting on the indicators, which I'm happy to talk about, but giving us a sense of how we are getting aid to support our work towards the SDGs. Why I say it gives us a different perspective is anytime we talk about reporting on the SDGs, we say, have you ever reported on it once, twice, thrice? We hardly have conversations on the frequency of the reporting and a measure to see the changes that are happening over time. What the IATI data, from my perspective, is bringing to the board is to help us ask those fundamental questions, as in whether whatever aid that we have for a particular SDG, one, is it available? Are we reporting adequately across all the 17 SDGs from the perspective of funding? And two, we ask the question whether, if we are reporting on the funding, is it sufficient? Are there duplicates for the reporting that we have? And also asking ourselves whether, if there are duplicates across a particular SDG, is it possible to relate the areas that we are not getting funding from? What I really see as a real resourcefulness of the IATI data is our work with the Ministry of Finance in Ghana on SDG budgeting. I'm hoping that this will give us a platform to integrate our data on the national SDG budgeting vis-a-vis what we are getting from the aid transparency platform. Then once you integrate those two data sets, it takes us a step forward in the conversation on the reporting of the SDGs, as in not just saying that you have an indicator for a particular SDG, but going ahead to measure the extent to which funding is available and whether we are off the target or not. Let me quickly mention that I'm happy Zachary mentioned the SDG 2, which has to do with ending hunger. What we did in Ghana a couple of weeks back is to bring on board FAO, NWFP, and indeed IFAD for us to have a conversation on where we are with our food insecurity statistics, given that there seem to be some overlaps with the measurement of food insecurity from these two government agencies. So the bottom line really going forward with the SDGs is how we can get an integrated data like what the IATI is bringing on board, what the SDG budgeting from the national perspective would help us to do, and do a more conscious harmonization of it to get a better assessment of how far are we from. I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Samuel. Zachary, the GAFS dashboard uses several sources of data. What specific data is used to provide what data, and how is IATI data used? And what are the benefits and what are the challenges of the IATI data?
Sure. Thanks, George. So, as I mentioned, the dashboard is really that one-stop shop for all things food and nutrition security. So if I were to break that down into the different types of data, first is about early warnings. How do we know when a food and nutrition security crisis is emerging? And there are hundreds of organizations involved in that landscape. So instead of going to all of those different sites, you have one site that you can go to get the latest on what the state of food insecurity is for a country. Second big issue that we found is when it came to programming data, who's doing what, where, that information was also scattered all over the place. Either you have a specific donor or a major donor who has their own website, you have implementing partners such as the United Nations Agency with their own website. Really, again, scattered across the ecosystem, how do we bring it together? That's what the dashboard's looking at. I think a third bucket I would like to highlight is our knowledge products. A lot of incredible minds out there, Brookings, others included, who are doing a lot of great research in this area. But again, it's just going on their own home website. How do we bring that together? And I love the comment about the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? By bringing it together, we can then do further analysis on this. And that's something that certainly the bank has a comparative advantage in, and we're looking into. The last piece here, and it relates to your question, George, on financial data. The availability of financial data, particularly in analyzing the state of food and nutrition security responses, has not really been pulled together in a coherent, systematic way. So you have, for instance, OECD DAC data, and great curated data set, but very late. And when you're facing a food and nutrition security crisis, time is of the essence, information is of the essence. And really, we've been dealing somewhat in a black hole here. Who's mobilizing what? There's a lot of expectations, for instance, for country teams, country colleagues to have a good network, to liaise in that way. This is not a systems-based approach. And so what we've done is we've partnered very closely with IATI, and there's some really incredible people there. Just to mention Stephen Flower, really incredible support from Stephen, UNDP, the IATI Secretariat, but worked to actually take a pretty pioneering effort that was used around COVID to track COVID responses and to say, can we actually take that methodology and apply it to track food and nutrition security data? And we did, and we launched it on the IATI website. And what's very interesting is you start to see a lot of reactions to that posting on a public space. You start to see a lot of implementing partners say, well, you're not capturing this or you're not capturing that. Well, that gives us a concrete basis to then go to those partners and try to see, well, how are you publishing that information, right? Do we need to change our methodology, or do you need to change the way in which you're uploading that information? So just to name a few benefits that we've also seen. So we can break this data down now by global, regional, country level lens, something that we haven't been able to do before. It's a nice way of aggregating, disaggregating. Second way, I think, I'm a big proponent of, data for what? right? It really should be data for action, data for making change on the ground. It's nice to have data for academic and research purposes, but the role that I play and the role that many people in the bank play is we need to make progress on our development goals. So one of those action points is to say, with this information, we can start to see those gaps in the system. How do we fill those gaps? How do we do it in a more systematic way versus an ad hoc way? The third piece I'd like to say on a benefit is it really provides insight into what is being mobilized and by whom. And there, we try to do our best, and I think we've gotten better over the years to reduce duplication across agencies. And I think my fellow, bilateral partners have really imposed, this kind of harder standard on value for money, making sure we're maximizing every dollar, because these dollars are hard to come by. We don't have a lot of them. And when you get this information together, you can start to do this in a bit more of a predictable fashion. I think you also asked me about challenges.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm particularly interested in that.
Okay, challenges. Here we go. So one is a very basic challenge. It's about getting the word out about what is, for instance, IATI. Even within my own institution, but particularly those at the country level, to recognize that there is this really important resource out there, and we haven't been leveraging it like we should have. And so just, I think, spreading the word, making sure people know it's out there, we're promoting it. Second, I think, challenge is at times data quality. I think you have different partners, some really good partners, big partners, and I love the index, right, showing those great examples. But you've got partners who are producing very good data, and then you've got partners who may be a bit inconsistent in that production. So we need that consistency. We need timeliness of that data. And like anything, it affects our analysis. You have bad data in, you're going to get poor results out. And there's not AI or anything else isn't going to fix that too much for us. The last thing I would say on a challenge, but it's more of a plea, I think, to the IATI publishers is we need those publishers to consistently publish their information in a clean way, obviously, but to do so in a timely manner. I think it's a bit absurd, or it has been absurd. Those people who are leading responses on the ground have to spend precious time trying to figure out this information and go, in 1,000 different ways. They're not experts when it comes to financing or tracking this information. But we have the resources. And I think that's one thing that's nice about something like the global dashboard. It's going to curate that information for them. So when you have a practitioner in the field, what's the status of the response? Who's getting what? We can go much further. We have a lot of plans to do that, and I'll speak a little bit about that maybe if we have time. But those would be some of those challenges.
On the challenges, I'm not sure if it's a question or a suggestion, but from Gary's presentation and your comment, you notice that not all donors are putting up all of the data they should be. Seems to me that if you went back to those donors and they heard from the World Bank that the World Bank wants to use their data, it might be not just publish what you fund that's out there advocating with donors to do more, but it's the major multilateral financial institution. Is that a question or a suggestion?
It could be both, but I think you raise a really important point here. Because what is our foundation? What's our basis for going to them with this, right? If you just go to a donor and you're asking them to do a lot more work internally, it feels maybe like a bureaucratic headache, right? But if you can translate it in a way that says this information makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. It makes a difference on us knowing what's the state of response, whether or not we need to mobilize additional money, who's doing what in the ecosystem. It will save lives. It will save livelihoods. It will also save resources, because when we act earlier, all of those things begin to click. What we know for a fact is when we act late, it costs more, not only in terms of lives, but also in terms of resources.
Great. Christoph.
Yes.
The U.S., with AID carrying the responsibility, has recently launched its own portal for tracking contributions to the SDGs. Give us a little bit about that. And what else is the U.S. doing to help partner countries meet their obligations and use data? And is this SDG data used to coordinate to interagency and with other donors?
Great, thank you so much. So as you noticed, I'm wearing an SDG pin today. I think one of the key questions that always come about with the SDGs in the United States is, are we really committed? I experienced that as the OECD DAC delegate for the US, and I'm here to say we are committed, and this was an initiative from the NSC that really said we need to show we're making some sort of progress and some sort of commitment towards the SDGs, and show that as an American people, we are part of this global movement. That said, we are a federal government, which is something that I always had to explain in Paris to our fellow donors, that we have 50 states that do lots of different things, that we really value our independence and the independence of our states to make their own decisions. And so that's always been part of the dynamic. That said, we've created this dashboard that really looks at our foreign assistance and ties it to SDGs. And I think what you'll find is that in the 3 years of this administration, we can now say with pretty much confidence that $150 billion of U.S. foreign assistance went to support the SDGs. And to support Laurel's point, we know that the funds support more than one SDG and that they're all interconnected. And I personally like the SDGs from the perspective of they provide one language, one way to speak about development that we can understand each other. And having lived and worked in different countries where we have different languages and cultures and where everything is so diverse, having one language set to talk about development is super helpful across the planet. And so we want to do what we can to support that movement, and this is our effort. How we use the SDG data, I think we're also committed to helping our developing countries report on SDGs. I'd say, in many places we're helping build capacity to collect data and report data. We're a huge health partner, and in that context, I know we've funded demographic health surveys in a number of countries, and those data sets actually go on to be used by developing countries for their reporting on SDGs. So we're part of creating an ecosystem of data that allows countries to report on SDGs.
Great. Samuel, really the ultimate target of IATI is partner governments. To serve them so they know what's going on in their country and elsewhere. What are the tools that are missing for you from a statistical perspective in order to track and meet the SDGs?
George, I think the issue of what you are reporting and the analytical side of what you are reporting, in my view, is what is missing. National statistical offices have been very good at collecting data and telling us where we are as a country, and for that matter, how we are making progress over time. What we've not been able to do is that analytical part of the story that would help us follow through issues in a logical framework perspective. So from the perspective of the IATI data that we're talking about, and which is why I'm excited about it, is that it's giving us a different perspective in terms of just reporting prevalence rates. As I indicated earlier on, Ghana for the past few years has been talking about going beyond aid. What does it take to go beyond aid, and in what areas are you going to go beyond aid? At what level of aid would you say that I'm going to get a multiplier effect, so given this time frame, I'll be able to go beyond aid? And this is exactly the conversation that we are having now. A different perspective of data that gives us that opportunity to be a bit more analytical in the reporting of what we are doing. I made a point earlier on about the benefits of the IATI data. One of the things that I missed out earlier on has to do with the sequencing of the funding that we are getting. As was rightly said, it's going to tell you where you are getting what from, but we all know that in the policy environment, some policies would have to precede others, and some others are consequences of existing policies. This IATI framework should be thought through in a way that if there are duplicates, it doesn't just highlight the fact that they are duplicates, but sometimes they are duplicates in a way that that sequencing has been missed or that sequencing has been followed. From a theory of change perspective, through to a funding perspective. So this is going to give us an opportunity to go beyond just reporting where we are with different socioeconomic issues, but an opportunity to begin to be a bit more analytical. And that is what NSOs should be looking at going forward. Really, with the data that we have, our work now is more of the analytical side, and once we do that, we'll be able to address some of the complex challenges. Thank you, Enova.
Great. Thank you, Samuel. Zachary, the GAFS dashboard is quite an innovation on how you join different sets of data and use it for real-time decision-making. Are there changes, further innovations that are coming that we should expect?
Thanks, George. Yes, there are. I'll speak a little bit about that, but I just want to say, like, what is our measure of success with all of this effort, right? It's about that action piece of it. And for us, success is to be able to generate more timely, well-coordinated decisions to get ahead of these crises, to actually make them a thing of the past. We've seen, unfortunately, those costs of delays that I was alluding to previously. If I could give you an example, in 2010, Somalia faced a major famine. It's one of the few contexts where we had official famine declared. What is unfortunate also is that in the year preceding the official declaration of famine in the country, there were over 100 early warnings saying that conditions were getting really, really bad. By the time that we actually had the famine declaration, over half of the 250,000 people that died from that event had already perished. That's the cost of delay that I was referencing. And unfortunately, also, there is this tendency to act late still. We are still seeing crises that are being forgotten. While some crises get a lot of the headlines, other crises are slipping through the cracks. And you just need to follow a United Nations partner to see the calls for please don't forget about certain crises. So we want to rid the system of those delays. And one of the ways in which we are moving that forward in a more systematic fashion is we're working closely with governments, United Nations, non-governmental organization partners to put in place what are called preparedness plans for food and nutrition security crises. It's a very comprehensive effort, involves interministerial dialogue, it involves all of those different partners that I mentioned. But we have now 25 countries that have committed to putting in place these plans. And we are expecting by 2030 to have 60 countries covering every country that has these crisis conditions. Plan's a very simple idea. It's about being extremely detailed about how crisis risks are being monitored in a country and how we convene the right people at the right time to make decisions. So it's not about just sending a report and putting it online. It's about once that report is out, we convene within X number of days, we make a decision and decide if we need to scale up that type of action. And if you look at Somalia, coming full circle, right? The government has recently launched that plan, and it's a bit of a plug, but you should go onto the GAFS website and you can actually pull that plan. You can see the development of it, and you can actually read it. But it's a change in that ecosystem, and I mention all of that because when we talk about systems, this is one of the ways in which we're doing it. We're basically saying these plans will be in place, but then what? What happens if this plan needs to be triggered? And that's where we're launching a brand new collaboration with our IATI counterparts to put in place special reporting mechanisms. So using special codes that when one of these plans is triggered, which is a recognition that a country is facing a crisis, we can then have a dedicated means for tracking what's the status of the response that's specifically focused on that triggered plan. That's a brand new innovation in the system, and it's something that will really help us see where are the gaps, why is money not moving, let's diagnose it a little bit better. Of course, I just want to mention it's not an easy agenda. You have a lot of different partners involved, and it will take us years to actually get it right. But in many ways, well, just to say, in many ways, there's a lot of merit to the view that if this was easy, it would have already been done. But I think just standing and working on this for many years now, no institution can do this alone. You know, this idea of siloed approaches of, you know, we can, you know, just be in our own little circle. We're trying to get rid of that. And I think that's the spirit of that dashboard as well. And I'm really proud that we're taking the right steps to build that foundation. And also, I think when we look at systems, building systems, we can't live off of this endless string of Band-Aids that we've been using. We need a real sustained investment in systems. And that's actually what we're building, and including particularly with our IATI counterparts. I need to say one thing before we leave this part of the segment. There's a tendency, I think, to see suffering in this world and to feel very hopeless about it. There are repeated narratives with phrases such as, this is how it's always been, this is how it always will be. And if I had one wish today, it would be that everyone leaves here with the understanding that we do not need to live with this reality. We know how to end these crises. We can end them within our own generation. And our collaborations with IATI have been an important step in making real progress in delivering that vision. And we look forward to our continued collaborations with IATI. Thanks.
Good. Nice statement. I'm going to ask one more question and then go to the audience. Christoph, AID puts a lot of effort into gathering and publishing the data. You've heard from some of us as to, how often is that data actually used by AID, by the interagency, by your missions? Give us a sense of to what extent it really is used for decision making and what can be done to socialize it more, if that's what's needed.
Sure. So we use all sorts of different data points as we make decisions along our country strategy and activity planning. So clearly, we use data on pipelines, how much is being spent, how much people still have. We use data. We have to analyze data from when Congress passes legislation, it has earmarks. So there's a whole bunch of data there that we have to collect and make sure that we're following to the letter of the law what Congress's intent and the American people's intent with is how we use it. We use data in terms of the evidence that we have generated ourselves in terms of evaluations and through our performance plans, performance reports that collect standard data across foreign assistance to look at whether we're achieving our targets. But more importantly, we're also looking at global data. And I think we have a new Office of the Chief Economist that was created under this administration with a very well-known economist, Dean Carlin, who is our chief economist, and he constantly challenges us to look at how we can use external data more. And that's why I get to this whole AI point, because there is a ton of external data that I think we could be looking at more closely, and that I think is the trend in the future, is a global data community that we're all looking at. We are also looking more and more with our localization agenda at local data. And one thing I wanted to highlight is we have a partnership with CDG, the Center for Global Development, and Hewlett to work on building the capacity of local evidence creating institutions in Africa and how they can help do more evaluations of USAID projects directly, so that there is a culture of local evidence generation in the countries that we work in. So I think we also continue to do country roadmaps, which look at third-party independent indicators, looking at capacity of governments and the commitment of governments to development, and use that to help inform conversations and decisions with host governments. So hopefully you see that through many different parts of our planning processes, we're constantly looking at how we can use data and improve the use of data. And then just to put a plug for SDG 16, since I know the SDG agenda is indivisible and it's universal, but SDG 16 plays a particularly important role in my mind from my experience in the field, because good governance and good institutions are really the foundation for all development. So really working on that together is a huge priority.
Good. It's now the time for the audience to continue the conversation. Junji, there's a lady right here who's got her hand up. Please, right here on the third row, please introduce yourself and keep your question concise.
My name is Raj Badabil, and I'm a former senior economist with the United Nations. And my work has been on a number of
Hold the microphone a little closer.
African development countries, Zambia in particular. The question I have is, aid is supposed to develop or help a country develop, but countries have been receiving aid from time immemorial for the last 60, 70, 80 years, 60, 70 years. And there hasn't been much impact in terms of their not having the need for development assistance. So the question is, how aid is coordinated at the receiving end? Because that was one the thorny issue in the case of Zambia.
How is it used on the receiving end?
In other words, countries that are receiving aid, how are they using those funds? Because so many agencies are putting in money in projects, and often these projects are duplicated or part of the other, but they are not coordinated. And in terms of impact, they don't show the impact, and therefore effectiveness. I'm wondering how this data can tell us if there is a way to know how aid is coordinated by the Central Statistical Office. In the case of Zambia, they had a separate office, Aid Coordination Office, but that was a long time ago, in the 90s. Aid Coordination, where they saw that country X is putting money in this project and country Y has money also. They said
you're really asking to Samuel, give us a little bit on how he and his country uses the data that they receive, correct?
And the agency they have in terms of saying, look, we have this project, agency X is putting in money. Now, can you move this into another? We can tell you. Thank you very much.
Samuel, would you like to address that?
Absolutely. And George, it's a very important and brilliant question. I think there are two things that I want to bring to the fore for us to reflect on. One is what was said earlier on, the culture of evaluating programs, government policies, sectorial policies, national policies are virtually missing in a number of countries, global south. And this is where the conversation should start from. If we are conscious and deliberate about these evaluations, it would prompt us to reflect further on how they are coordinated. From the perspective of the launch that we've witnessed today, it's one of the things that going forward I want to engage the team on in terms of the extent to which we disaggregate the funding. If we're going to provide the data in terms of blocks, X amount of money was given for water, and we don't disaggregate this from the perspective of technical, operational, which of the money would stay in the receiving country, which of the money would go back to where we are getting it from, and all that. These questions will not be able to answer them. So we should be in a position to get a very disaggregated data from the perspective of operational use of the resources, and as was said earlier, on the timing and the sequencing of the funds. For us at Ghana, the Ghana Statistical Service is not responsible for coordinating aid that comes into the country, but it brings to the fore another question in terms of the role of national statistical offices when it comes to issues around financing, both government financing issues and financing in terms of aids. I can say that quite a number of NSOs in the West African sub-region do not get into that, and this is left at the Ministry of Finance and the central bank's perspective. So if we really want to coordinate this, we need to be conscious about it and get the National Statistical Office to be the repository of all these. What we've done in Ghana is to begin to talk to all the development partners, heads of corporations, and the UN agencies to build a central repository of all policies, of all projects, of all data, all statistics. Then in that repository, George, as you rightly said, we can use an AI tool to begin to see how these things can well be coordinated from a data, statistics, and a policy point of view. Thank you, Enova.
Thanks. Gary, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. If I can just make a quick contribution in response to the question. So
hold the mic closer.
For sure, the Aid Transparency Index, the 2024 findings show that evaluation and impact and results data is where we need the most attention. It's where we have the least information. So there is fundamentally a problem there. I showcased the AFDB example. there are many of those, but not across all agencies and across all sectors and so on. So we need to put more work in to know what these funds are doing. To Samuel's point, then following those evaluations, you can then talk about how were they coordinated and could they have been better implemented. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, fundamentally for coordination, we're not seeing enough use of the data that's there. We're not seeing enough awareness of it. Zachary spoke to that point, that not enough individuals on the ground or organizations globally are aware of this hugely valuable data set. Maybe that's because it wasn't so accessible in recent years, but it is now. There's really good, really intuitive tools that help us do that. The Global Alliance for Food Security Dashboard is one great example of using the data for for development effectiveness. There aren't enough of those. So if there are and they're happening, please come and tell us, and we'd love to showcase them more. But we need institutions who produce this data to own it and to use it for their own decision making and for the development effectiveness that you're seeking.
Good. So I don't know if I'm ending this on an advertisement or helping all the researchers out there, but I want to go through how you access this data. So I want to start with Laurel. And how does somebody here or online, what's the easiest way to access what you showed us today on the UNDP website?
Thank you. That's an easy one. So that's data.undp.org. You'll go into that space, you'll look for the SDG push diagnostics, and you'll go through every single country. There's also a space where you can experiment with that data yourself. So that's all there for you. And increasingly, George and colleagues, our next steps is very much to be focused data for what? On the issues that are most important, if that's food, certainly, and climate finance, and start to make the connection with exactly the data sets that we're talking about here today. And I think, Samuel, thank you also for putting those points forward on local ownership. I mean, this is what's key, and this is really, really important for all the work that we're doing, awareness raising and other. It needs to be demanded. And it needs to be utilized in a different way perhaps before, so that we have a different type of conversation around the table as partners, as equal partners, as equally struggling with these challenges, not one side or the other, not some of us on one side of the table saying, why progress so slow? Why financing so slow? Why so unjust? Why so expensive to access the financing to be able to advance a transition which is causing chaos in a country of which we are not the making? These are questions of justice, and I think some of the important research that's coming out too, we want to be able to make this case, we want to be able to countries to be able to use this to advocate, is that if we start with green before a just transition, the research is telling us over and over that we're entrenching the same power and same inequality imbalances and so on that put us in this problem in the first place. So it's fundamental. And I think as much as, we take this forward, certainly for us at UNDP, that's where we're advocating from. And that's, to me, what can unlock progress in a different way. It'll put some of us in a different position and really incentivize publishers to put the table, because they will see it utilized. And I think that's really where we start to generate a different type of coalition. That's more than you asked me. Data.undp.org.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Zachary, again, accessing the GAF's dashboard. The easiest way to do that?
It's that gafs.info. And
.org?
Just .info.
.info.
Actually, just put GAFS in Google or your selected browser of choice, and it will pop up. And we're constantly updating that dashboard. And when I say that we have a coalition around the table, we have a massive coalition around the table. People want to see their data featured on this website. They want to make sure that it's maintained. And it takes an entire army of people to keep that information updated. And we're moving into, again, that aid architecture that's in the 21st century. So if you want to live track financing for a very specific country and know what's going on, it requires maintenance. It requires seeing what's happening with the data. Why is it breaking down here? Do we have a methodology, a very quick fix? Is it it takes a whole team, right? IT people, technical people. And I think it's a plug as well, right? I mean, I think we have such limited resources across the aid ecosystem. And this is one of those investments that really, really, really pays off, right? It pays off when it comes to reporting on the results. I think the question that, Raj, I believe was your name, you asked is an extremely pertinent one, because we should be able to answer that very quickly for you. We should be able to point you to whatever country, the impact assessments for a particular agency, and tell you this is exactly the results that have been generated, right? We shouldn't have to fumble around trying to find this information. And that's what we've done for a while. And my hope is that the pioneering work we're doing in the food and nutrition security space is applicable in a lot of different spaces, whether or not we're talking about the pandemic risk side, or the climate side. I mean, there's a lot of efforts going on, and I think you're seeing that shift away from it's better for us to work together. It's hard to work together. We have entrenched ways of doing things with our own institutions, but this is for the greater good. And again, it takes time. But what kind of investor are you? Are you just a high frequency trader? Are you this long-term investor that wants to see those returns? So I think the long-term investment is what we should be aiming for.
Great, thanks. Christoph, you've mentioned foreignassistance.gov. And one of my favorite parts of that dashboard is Beyond USG, which brings IATI data in so you can see what other donors are doing in particular countries. And what's the best way on the dashboard to find the SDG data, the linking the U.S. contributions?
Yeah, so first just wanted to say that we used to have 2 government websites, and so we've resolved that, and that I think is really great. So we have one website, it's called foreignassistance.gov.
You had 2 websites that had differing information.
Yes, so we took care of that. So now we have one, and it's called foreignassistance.gov. It collects and presents data on over 20 U.S. government agencies that report their foreign assistance. You can look at it through different filters. There's the country filter, there's the agency filter. You can look at it through the SDG reporting, and then in Beyond USG, there's the Development Cooperation Landscape tool, which we really developed more for internal use for our own staff to be able to see what is available on IATI in the countries where they're working and to understand better what other donors are reporting in their own country. But that's also publicly available on the website. And we accept and welcome any kind of feedback. We're always trying to improve our transparency and accountability to the American taxpayer and the American people. And that's why we're here today. So any feedback is always welcome.
Good. Samuel, any parting words you'd like to lead us with, particularly where Ghana's going and what you need?
George and team, once again, thank you very much. This is an exciting journey that we've just started. I've already mentioned to Carrie that we're going to see how whatever we have on the IAT can be integrated into the central repository that I talked about. We're going to have the data, statistics, and policy, and it's all about integration, harmonization to help solve the complex challenges that we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if anybody else has learned anything today or is convinced yet that IATI and other data is useful and important. But when I started talking to Gary and Sally about doing this launch, the beginning of the year, sort of scratched our heads on what the focus was going to be. And when we decided the focus really should be on use and tracking the SDGs, I kept scratching my head about how this was going to happen. And so the last 6 months has been a really learning process for me on how this data can be used. And it came together in the blog, which I posted yesterday. You find 4 or 5 more examples of how you can use IATI data, including the GAFS data sets. On there is a link to the D portal, which Gary used in his example. There's a link there to the GFS dashboard. So looking at that blog, which is on the Brookings website, is another way to find examples of how the data can be used and to link some from these sources. And with that, let me thank you all for joining us today and for the presentation.